hides this little dwarf playing games while rambling incoherently into a microphone. Why? Not just because they can, and they continue with Strangeland with the developer's commentary.
The exterior of the Hall of Mirrors, of course, sports the first instance of mirrors the player sees. The majority of the mirror surfaces are simply a flip of a sprite and a small blur application on the graphic, but further inside the interior of the Hall of Mirrors, we utilize a fine transformation and skew effects to project the player's sprite to the mirror surface. Another thing to note here is the two force fields. The visual effect is done via a shader that I had to translate into a software renderer because AGS doesn't support external shaders at this time, and then a small crossfade between two shaders to make sure that it doesn't look awkward when it loops.
The third and last expansion to Strangeland began in May of 2020, and it arose because our lead tester felt that the Hall of Mirrors was a little bit too perfunctory. At that time, all you would do once you were inside it, you would get past the ledger area, and then in the next room, all you had to do was drink the pool water and then interact with the three mirrors where you spoke to the NPCs. You didn't break those mirrors in any way. And after you did that, if you went back into the other room, the mirror up there was then a portal and you walked through it. And he felt, rightly, that this just felt like padding. It didn't feel like meaningful adventure gameplay, and that we needed something more. So the first thing we did was add the shard idea, that really what the stranger was doing in this area was tearing apart his alter egos, these NPCs, and then assembling them back together into an image of himself, getting closer to self-understanding. So we added the sequence where you break the pieces out of the NPC mirrors, and then you would take those shards and put them into the broken mirror. So that was pretty much the same as it is now. But after we added that, he made a further argument that while this was sort of isomorphic to a puzzle, masquerading as a puzzle, it wasn't really that much of a puzzle, because you broke the mirror shards just by clicking on the mirror and you assembled the mirror shards. That was sort of a very basic jigsaw puzzle. But he felt that it still seemed thin. And so we added the puzzle with raising and lowering the water level, losing the mirror shard into the pool. And, once we had all of that, it did feel like the Hall of Mirrors was a sufficiently robust area. It had a variety of thematic references that tied it well to the rest of the game. Some puzzle action. Generally, I don't like to have a lot of really hard puzzles near the end of a game, because I think as the player nears the ending, you want to have a certain propulsive force where the puzzles get a little easier, and the action picks up pace leading to a climax. But I did think that now we have solid puzzles in this area, and at that point, the scope of the game was really pretty much done.
I'm sick of looking at myself. I'm sick of being watched, too. Looks like some kind of force field. It's not like my luck can get any worse.
Proverbially, breaking a mirror earns you 7 years of bad luck.
Only 2 rocks left. Just enough for what needs to be done. Here we go again. Well, last one. Huh. For once I did something right. Not bad. Look at that. In we go.
Please write your name to continue.
A flickering lamp. Another eye. Another mirror. So, what do I write? That's it, isn't it? Your name. Well, I wasn't planning on going back anyway.
The man who takes the right path will find his cup runs over, while he who goes the other way will, by and by, be left with nothing.
We spent an awful amount of time trying to make this beautiful room more engaging in terms of gameplay. I think we spent like 2 to 3 weeks figuring it out. The focal point of resolving those gameplay issues is this particular puzzle. Eventually, when we came up with it, what remained was actually coding it. Our artist likes to draw in layers, and AGS hates layers, or rather makes working layers a pain most of the times. Its final animation is unfortunately not dynamic. It was done in Adobe After Effects, but everything else is. That has been my goal the entire game, to keep everything affected by the player, if the player can affect them. You can hold a shard in front of you and you get reflected. You can rotate a slot and your reflections remain static, but most importantly, you feel as if you're piecing yourself together, because you see that reflection when you move the shard pieces around trying to mix and match. The Hall of Mirrors interior room. I think I've spent an awful amount of time in this room. There's so many things going on. Primarily, the big visual effect is of course the mirrors that are located inside the room. Victor, our artist, wanted this room to look cool as heck, so I put all kinds of efforts towards that. The mirrors reflect into the pool, and the pool, which is a tinted mirror of variable scale and size, reflects them back. Another visual part of this room are the small drops that fall out from the ceiling into the pool, creating ripples that expand and fade out. But one of my favorite things here has to be the water effects that the player can see when a shard drops into the pool. The mirror shard is affected by the pool, and a bunch of bubbles are created when it first collides with the pool. These are small things, but I'm really happy with the amount of detail that has been put to ensure that this feels like a breathing world that mostly adheres to the rules of physics in one way or another.
Whew, strong stuff. Well, it worked for Alice.
That is, the titular protagonist of Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This time she found a little bottle on it, which certainly was not there before, and around the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words "Drink Me" beautifully printed on it in large letters.
My head feels strange. Not again. Where is it? What the hell? It's a raven's head on my body. A nice change, actually.
Call the raven, huh?
As noted elsewhere, the poem is thematically and symbolically woven through Strangeland regarding The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe.
Alright. Ever heard of the mirror mark test?
Sometimes called the mirror self-recognition test or the red spot technique, it measures an animal's self-awareness by testing whether it can recognize itself in a mirror after a mark has been applied to its face.
Eggheads use it to see if an animal really knows itself. You put the thing in front of a mirror, and you put a mark on its forehead. Then you see, does it understand the animal in the mirror is its own reflection? Or does it just get mad and lash out? Everything from God to corvids have passed it.
Though most corvids have failed the test, 2 Eurasian magpies once passed it, no raven has. The raven might be alluding to the Bible's account that God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. For God to create human beings in his own image, God would have to recognize that image. Alternatively, the raven might be alluding to the moment the Lord set a mark upon Cain, typically understood to be Cain's forehead, or the Book of John's remark that no man had seen the Father save he which is of God. He had seen the Father, a Trinitarian self-recognition.
And yet, here you are.
A suggestion that the stranger's response to seeing himself in the carnivals reflected in the carnival's denizen has shown a lack of self-recognition, and that the stranger has responded to seeing himself in the mirrors by attacking them.
Oh, so you don't like the mirror? Well then, let me give you another mark to work with. Ravens mate for life. Actually, most of us birds are monogamous, which means that thing you humans find so romantic. You're not spotting yourselves in swans and turtle doves. You're admiring the avian in humanity. It's the closest you'll ever get to flying, really.
Humanity's dream of flying is a theme both in Primordia and Strangeland.
Still lashing out. Only a fool thinks he needs a broken mirror to reflect a broken man.
In my great aunt's essay, Poetry and People, she criticizes avant-garde enthusiasts who apparently believe that only a fragmented mirror can accurately reflect a fragmented object.
A little broken glass never hurt anybody, right? Hello?
The wheel card in the tarot deck contains the 4 letters tarot, which can be read in various ways as tarot, tarot, Torah, Torah, the Hebrew scripture, rota, the Latin word for a wheel, or at this point really exclusive to Strangeland and not a usual observation in cartomancy, otar, alluding to otter, or the author of the Norse mythology myth of Otter's ransom. As noted elsewhere, each of these is thematically linked to Strangeland, which incorporates tarot symbols, biblical references, the concept of wheel of life, and the Otter's ransom myth.
Mystic, sacred, mythic, profane.
Mystic corresponding to tarot, sacred to the Torah, mythic to Otter, and profane to the wheel.
And so the wheel turns on and on. Young eyes see the world for what it is.
The sense here is that the children lack the baggage of experience, belief and culture that cause adults to see the world in symbolic or metaphorical terms.
But from our teachers we learn pareidolia.
Pareidolia is the human tendency to identify shapes, particularly human faces, in inanimate objects, In his renowned Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art, Scott McCloud identifies human tendency to pareidolia as the reason why simplified expressions in comics are so effective. They allow the reader to find their own face within the story. The same theory, perhaps, applies to pixel art.
Our vision warps until we see nothing but distorted versions of ourselves in every stone and socket.
Socket, the most conventional example of pareidolia, is a grounded socket where there are 3 holes that appear to make a simple face. Stone, the state emblem of New Hampshire, where I attended college, was the Old Man of the Mountain, a granite formation that, thanks to pareidolia, appeared to be the profile of a man's face. It collapsed in 2003.
And when one sees his sin etched in every inch, he's left with no choice but blindness.
Early in-game, A-Tree expresses a similar sentiment, but suggests annihilation of one's identity as solution.
Too slow. Always too slow. Hello? Did you think I was full? That I was gone? No. I will hound you until I swallow your son.
The black dog is referring back to the tarot card the stranger selected to represent the real world. In Norse mythology, which suffuses? I don't know that word. Strangeland, the wolf's skull, one who mocks, and Hati, the one who hates, pursue the sun and the moon respectively and will devour them at the end of days of Ragnarok.
A ladder? That wasn't there before. Funny. No bottle down here. A cyclopean eye.
We started implementing our own save system to basically accomplish 2 things. First, faster saves. Secondly, non-breaking saves. The problem with hideous default save system is that it doesn't create a save game, but a save state containing the state of the game's engine at the time the save button is pressed. That meant our saves ended up gigantic. Its save size would be 180 megabytes, and because of their enormous size, they would consequently cause frame drops when saving and loading. With that in mind, we primarily wanted to have an autosave on every room change, and that ended up causing a lot of issues for the aforementioned reasons. So, with a week's worth of work, we started implementing a save game system that would only store the variables we want to store. Each save game, instead of being 180 megabytes of bulk data, ended up being 24 kilobytes instead. And the best part? No matter what changes in the game in the future, the save game will always work, something that is impossible with AGS, because depending on the change, the default save game most of the time will unfortunately break.
I can barely even see myself with these pieces missing. progress. We're getting there. Almost got it. One more shard.
Primordia opens with Horatio saying, "Almost got it, one more setting."
There. What is that? There's some sort of energy beam coming from the mirror. Another portal. You know, someone once told me, the man who stands at a strange threshold should be cautious before he crosses it.
The stranger is recalling the scribe's warning, which was taken from the Havamel.
But what else am I going to do? I did it! I made it back! My pole star. I have to get her out of there. It's not even locked.
I've been a huge fan of Castlevania games all my life, mostly because I grew up playing Super Castlevania 4 on the Super Nintendo. A big part of that game are the various visual effects that utilize a chipset on the Super Nintendo called Mode 7. Mode 7 allows the perspective shift, scaling, and other applicable transformations on the screen, pixel by pixel. In Super Castlevania 4, one of the most famous visual effects that utilize Mode 7 is the cylinder stage. Essentially, in that stage, the background is projected like a rotating cylinder vertically. Given my love for that effect, I wanted to apply in our game. So that's how we have our moving clouds. It's the cylinder effect from Castlevania, except the cylinder is horizontal. Another use of the implementation of Mode 7 can be found after you exit the Hall of Mirrors, where there's a two-side projection of a ghost texture, with the right side being simply a mirror, with a diminishing scale to the middle as a vanishing point. The ghost texture was inspired by a dungeon from World of Warcraft where the souls of the damned come out from a well, and that was my intention visually.
In one of my first memories from preschool, I'm lying to my mom. I think the reason was that I was really bad at preschool. Somewhat amazingly, my parents retained my preschool progress reports, and as part of a general document dump, when my wife and I got our house, my parents declared that all the paperwork of mine that they'd saved over the years now had to be stored in our basement rather than their basement. And among the things I got were these report cards and progress reports going back to like age 3. And it's obvious that I was terrible at preschool. I didn't really fit in with the other kids. I did very poorly at even really basic things, sorting colors, building blocks, drawing, handwriting, pronouncing sounds. I had been partially deaf on and off for years because of ear infections. Maybe that contributed to it. So having nothing really to be proud about, no cool artwork, no goals in soccer, nothing like that. I'm lying to my mom and I'm telling her that at preschool that day, I had found a baby bird that had fallen out of its nest, and I put it back in the nest. And I can picture very vividly, as I'm telling her this, I'm looking at her face and waiting for that shine of parental pride that I'm expecting, but there's nothing. And in my, you know, toddler brain, I become convinced that it's because the deed that I'm falsely claiming to have done isn't grandiose enough. So I tell her, actually, the bird had a broken wing, but I found another wing and replaced its wing. And then I put it back in the nest. And still, no light of pride in her face. And so I say, also it had a broken leg, and I found a little twig, and I splinted its leg, and tied it with a piece of grass. And nothing, no flash of anything, maybe annoyance on her face. And so I just dropped the subject. And for years, I would remember this. And as I got older, when I was really little, I felt like she had been unfair to me, that she hadn't been proud, even though I knew I was lying. And then as I got a little older, the memory made me feel very ashamed. Partly that it was just such an absurd lie, that I would think that she would be proud of something so patently false. But anyway, hold on to that memory for years and years and years and years. And now, I'm in my 30s, and we're in this house, the house where I've just been reading the report card from preschool, that I have my daughters of my own. And we go out in our little backyard, and suddenly these mockingbirds start just dive bombing us. And, if you've seen mockingbirds, when their nest is threatened, mockingbirds can drive off a red-tailed hawk. They're absolutely fearless. And even though mockingbirds can make very beautiful calls, they can make very shrill, threatening calls. And so they're shrieking, swooping, pooping, and generally attacking us. And I realized that they must be upset that there's a nest somewhere nearby. And I don't want the kids. The kids have gotten scared, so I bring the girls inside and go back out. And the birds are still swooping. And I see on the ground there's this baby mockingbird that's fallen out of its nest. And I realize this is, fate. All these years, now I have a chance to actually do the deed that all those years ago I took false credit for. So I go into the garage and I put on my work gloves because I still sort of believed that urban legend that if a bird smells like you've touched it, the mother bird won't feed it. And I pick it up and I look around and I see in these bushes we have, the nest is in there. And the bushes have these thorns and twigs, and I'm wearing short sleeves, and the birds keep swooping and crapping on me. But, I know I've got to put the bird in very gently because it's so fragile. And so I'm sliding my hands through this bush, and the thorns are scratching my arms, the branches are scratching my arms. And, I can't pull the branches aside because then the nest would fall. And finally, I reach the nest and I gently deposit this baby bird in and quickly leave so that the parents can calm down. And that was like a Sunday. So I spend, all next week at work and don't spend any time outside. It's being an adult. And then the next weekend, we're back in the backyard and I'm playing with the girls. And I notice the mockingbirds aren't bothering us. In fact, the mockingbirds are gone. And I think, oh my God, maybe it's 2 weeks later, I think, we did it. You know, the baby is fledged, it's flown with its parents or flown off, and you know, this is it. I finally accomplished it. So the kids go back inside to have lunch, and I go back to the nest. And you know, I don't want to disturb it in case the baby's still in the nest. So I lean into the bushes, and you know, I notice like there's a wasp flying around my face, so I brush it aside and lean back in, and a thorn scratches me on the cheek. And I push my face in between the twigs so I can see the nest. And there's like two more wasps flying around, and I, you know, lean in a little bit more. And there in the nest is the baby bird carcass, and it's just seething with wasps that are devouring it. So, you know, when the phone rings and Superego says, "What bottom?" What bottom?
That's quite a story, actually. Rather gruesome.
I'm here. What? What is that? No. Oh, this is always my favorite part. Like I told you, you always drop the ball at the end. No! Don't bother. I'm already inside your head. You know that. I've always been watching. Watching you squander and ruin every single good thing in your life. Did you think you could win? Idiot. Take a good look at the setting you made for our little escapade. In your heart, you knew this was a carnival game. You knew life was a carnival game. Rigged from start to finish. It was never a matter of winning. Just a question of how much you would lose before you realized it was time to quit. Well, ready to quit yet? The golden wings. I can't reach them.
I only recently learned that there is some disagreement about whether the end-game puzzles of Monkey Island 1 and 2 and 3 are well designed. In my mind, the end game of Monkey Island 2 is the best end game of any adventure game ever, by a significant margin. For those who haven't played it or who have forgotten it, you are pursued by LeChuck, the zombie pirate, through a network of rooms. And in those rooms are various objects that you can use to craft a voodoo doll that allows you to get the upper hand on LeChuck. If LeChuck catches you, he uses his own voodoo doll to torment you, and the agony of that torment teleports you into a different room. And so the player has to quickly examine the surroundings, try to figure out what objects he can use, and then remember how he made a voodoo doll earlier in the game, what the components that he needed to make that voodoo doll are. And so he builds on that early game knowledge gained from prior puzzles, and eventually crafts the voodoo doll and is able to turn the tables on LeChuck. To me, it's the only boss battle that works in an adventure game. And video games in general are so conditioned to have boss battles that it really it works, at least for me as a player, in a way that other end games and adventure games don't. Yeah, when you have something like a sliding block puzzle at the end of Mask of Eternity, it doesn't have any of the same impact. I should just quickly footnote to say I think the boss battle at the end of King's Quest V is pretty good as well, but not as good as the LeChuck one. So, because I have such a high regard for the ending of Monkey Island 2, I drew upon it for the end game in Strangeland. As in Monkey Island 2, you reprise for a last time some of the puzzles you did earlier in the game. You make the grappling hook again, you get the knife again, and as you go through these rooms, they have a slightly different feel, and there's this urgency created by the fact that the superego dark thing is pursuing you and killing you if you don't act quickly. So I thought, great, and the lead tester on the project, when he played the area, sent me an email saying that the end game felt just like Monkey Island 2's end game, which I took to be a great compliment until he explained that he hated the end game of Monkey Island 2. And it turns out there's a significant number of players who dislike it. It was really too late to make any changes. I still think it's a good end game in Monkey Island 2, and I hope that we've done justice to that design concept. But it just goes to show how subjective puzzle design is, pacing. This is Tester and I think generally are very aligned in our view of game design, but it just happens that we have completely diametrically opposed views of one of the signature puzzles of one of the signature adventure games. And I guess it goes to show you can't please everyone all of the time, but it also shows the value of early on getting feedback. If we'd gotten feedback earlier on this puzzle, I would have done it slightly differently.
Not done yet? Aren't you sick of running? Your whole life. Running from that dark thing always just behind you, like a black dog. Hungry, angry, relentless. And you fed it, didn't you? Let it grow big enough to swallow the sun, didn't you? And now there's nowhere left to run.
HR Giga. So, yeah, Darkseid, big fan. Definitely watched a lot of long plays and let's plays of Darkseid 1 and 2 all throughout the production of Strangeland. Kind of love those games. Kind of have a real soft spot for them, weirdly. But yeah, HR Geiger didn't sit too well in the mix. Initially, Darkland, I guess I was maybe trying to channel Geiger a little too much in the Darkland, so I actually scaled that back at one point and wanted to include less of the biomechanical shapes that are just associated with Giga, and a bit more of my own sort of electromechanical elements. That started to become a bit more prominent, probably halfway through production, where I kind of the shapes I wanted crystallized in my mind and really kind of coalesced into the sort of dark shapes I really wanted for the dark world. It also happened during the end of production. I did a bit of freelance work for the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, and of course Giga did artwork for the Hells Angels, and there's beef between the two motorcycle clubs, so I felt that was a nice little I don't know, I would definitely tip my hat to my graphic rival HR Giga. Outlaws all the way, baby.
They're too heavy to lift.
I've fallen enough. That's the thing with shadows. You can never escape them, unless you go into utter darkness. But you failed even at that. You're too worthless to even quit while you're behind, let alone to win. You really thought you could save her from that dark crab that had her in its clutches. After all, a man is meant to be the hero of his own adventure, but not you. You are just a husk, a rat. I can't move with this noose around my neck.
Weird Dreams on Commodore 64. Now, I had a best friend back in primary school named Lawrence Stewart, and it blew my mind, my tiny little mind away back in 1991 or something, when first time I went up into the attic of his home. Beautiful place with a huge attic. And I saw something I'd never seen before, which was some beanbags and a couch in a lounge type area with a great big CRT TV playing Monkey Island. Now, of course, Monkey Island, not necessarily known for Commodore 64, but I bring this up because this was like I guess it changed my life seeing Monkey Island on this like home television, which I was used to watching Sequest DSV on and The Simpsons and stuff, and it's like, you're playing Monkey Island on this? What? We only play games on the home computer on a tiny little screen in the hallway. So yeah, I always loved hanging out with my friend Lawrence Stewart and playing. He also had this basement filled with Commodore 64s, playing Port of Call and Warcraft, not World of Warcraft, Warcraft 1, where he would just spam the shit out of red dragons and kill the shit out of me every time. I think he introduced me to Weird Dreams on C64. Him and his father. His dad was a huge computer nerd. I remember his dad playing Eye of the Beholder and being a huge Eye of the Beholder nerd when it was like, oh, your dad's obsessed with dungeon hack games. It was just unheard of for me, watching his dad playing Eye of the Beholder in the early 90s up in this attic. Yeah, Weird Dreams, obviously a big influence. Well, maybe not that obviously, but was a fairly big influence on Strangeland. Especially this room. I just wanted to really kind of use some visual cues from Weird Dreams to show off my kind of love for that game, and what I felt like, what better game to draw, influence and ideas from than Weird Dreams for Strangeland. Because it's the kind of game I wanted to make, basically, all the kind of assets I wanted to produce for Strangeland anyway. So yeah, this is basically very similar to the Hall of Mirrors from Weird Dreams. At one point, the protagonist, the stranger in Strangeland, had a set of pajamas that was very similar to the protagonist in Weird Dreams. That got killed pretty early by my team, at which point I pulled up some old picture references of like vintage retro straitjackets and created our own little kind of straitjacket outfit for the stranger. That's the story of me and Commodore 64 and Lawrence Stewart's attic. Shouts to Lawrence if you're listening to this. God, I would love it if you did, dude.
They don't have a cutting edge. As good a tree to die on as any.
I don't remember where the knife was.
You, of all people, should know the playwright's truth. Death is never a tragedy. Death is where a tragedy ends.
This is a reference to the fact that a tragedy play typically ends with one or many dead bodies on the stage.
Ever since I was still back going to university to my studies, I've been a huge fan of noise manipulation, specifically in music. I'm a big fan of shoegaze and noise rock genres, but also visually. There's some weird fascination I can't quite place regarding noise and how it manifests itself. Anyway, after finding a really well-liked tweet about a game project that is downright creepy and uses this very 80s horror film George Romero double future style of noise, I felt this need to replicate it for Strangeland. This is essentially produced by randomly offsetting the x-axis by a small amount of pixels of one of the three color layers of a picture, red, green, blue, and then blending that with a randomly generated noise picture, and lastly projecting that over our current screen at a very high transparency, over 80%. The result is very close to a film grain feel that we mostly associate with horror films of the 80s.
Now you're left with nothing but masks and metaphors, excuses and equivocations, and a woman always just out of reach.
See, I can't go into too much detail though, because that would take away the mystery of my art. You know, I don't actually like to call myself an artist that much. I when I say, you know, what do you do for a living, Victor? I usually say I'm just, you know, I'm a painter or illustrator. Well, you know, video game developer, obviously. I don't think of myself as an artiste. I mean, I came up doing graffiti pieces in the local drains and on the sides of trains when I was a kid. Graffiti art was my thing for a long time, until I discovered concept art and illustration, and then before too long concept art for computer games, and then before too long after that making my own games and forming my own studio. I completely forget where I was going with that. Oh, that's right. This was the meandering commentary that I just started recording without any specific thoughts or track in mind. But yeah, I don't really like to call myself an artist as such. I think there's art to what I do. I go to a lot of fair few, you know, gallery exhibitions of my friends, street artists for the most part, street artists, i.e. writers. Writers, for you out there that don't know, is like slang for anyone that does graffiti in Australia, basically. I think it's in America too. Like graffiti artists are known as writers, but here I was like, you're a writer. What do you write, mate? You know, what's your tag, as they say? Well, like, what's your graffiti tag? This is definitely my most meandering commentary so far. This is why I don't talk about my work much. I like to let my work speak for itself. I like to speak through my work. When it comes to talking about my work, it's usually on a Saturday night with some friends that also like artwork and a few drinks on the side.
Now there's nothing below. There are the tracks leading to the cage, leading to her. I've fallen enough. What do we make of a man who plays a deadly game, but only when the rules say he can't die? You're worse than a pawn. A sacrifice can't save your queen. And even if you reach the end of the board, she's not coming back. And it's all your fault.
Personal demons. Okay, this is a topic I'm not gonna delve too deeply into because I actually did fight, I feel like, a few personal demons working on this game, which I guess isn't the strangest thing in the world. I mean, I guess that's the crazy thing. I've mentioned earlier, you know, horror has always been interesting to me, and it's like, oh, horror is the coolest genre. I'd love to make a horror game. Horror's so cool, and you know, Gore Fest, and you know, The Thing, and Ninth Gate. But it's like, you actually spend a few years in a horror landscape of your own making, and yeah, it can be difficult. It can be difficult at the best of times. It can be really difficult at the worst of times. But I do actually feel like working through Strangeland, I've worked through a lot of my own personal issues. Yeah, which is interesting to say. I hope the kind of the best aspects of that translates to my work in the game, and I feel like it has in a way. I feel like facing my demons, I've been able to put them out on screen and really deal with them, and I feel like some of the shit I've been through is kind of scary, and bringing a little bit of that actual fear into my own work. I feel like it worked for me. It made the work interesting to do for me. It made the work flavorful and visceral, which is always good as an artist, to feel like you're doing work that, I don't know, just feels good to do, work that turns out good. And I feel like, in a way, the whole confrontation of one's personal demons has elicited some interesting things out of my work for this project, for sure.
Coward. I guess I'm nowhere. They're too heavy to lift. I've fallen enough. Fraud. Weakling. This is starting to feel like déjà vu, but not quite. Now, you're going to think I'm telling you about jamais vu for the first time.
Jamais vu, never seen in French, is a relatively common psychological state in which something familiar suddenly seems alien, new, or unreal. As elsewhere, the suggestion is that the stranger has gone through all of this before.
No matter how often we've already had this conversation, it's when you've heard something before, been somewhere before, met someone before, and yet it feels completely unfamiliar. If a man writes death 1,000 times, he starts to wonder, is that even a word?
A particular form called semantic satiation often occurs by repeating a word over and over, causing the word to seem unfamiliar or unreal.
But it is. Oh, how it is. Now we're getting somewhere. No, You're on a journey to nowhere, and you're wearing yourself to nothing. Do you really think you can escape me? I did it. I made it. But the dark thing, it's right behind me. There is no dark thing, you liar. These symbols are evasions. Crows, crabs, clowns. This grab bag of myths and masks and make-believe. It's all an evasion. She's dead. Do you understand? You can't talk your way out of that. You can't cut your way out of that. You can't imagine your way out of that. This figment, this fragment. Savor all you want, or don't. It doesn't matter. She's a fake, and you're a fraud. You already failed. You didn't save her. You can't. She's dead. This whole carnival is a lie. A funhouse mirror. Because you're too ashamed to look in a real mirror and see who you really are. You know I'm right. The only thing in your whole damned adventure that's ever been true is what I've been saying.
There is at least some suggestion that depression is evolutionarily valuable for focusing intensely on and unromantically on problems. What? That seems stupid. From, like, depression doesn't actually... The problem with depression, the meaning of depression, is that even though you focus very heavily on your problems, you can't actually solve them. That's why you are depressed. You are bereft of the strength to face your own problems. That's what depression feels like. That's what it is about. It is about powerlessness and about feeling of helplessness. So I fail to see how can it be evolutionally useful when depression basically makes you in severe cases it makes you borderline helpless. Actually, I feel like it wouldn't help you at all, evolutionarily speaking.
I am your mirror. He's lying.
He's telling you facts. But what a mirror can show is a dim reflection at best.
Now we see but a dim reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known, from Corinthians.
Our lives, ourselves, they're more than just facts. They're truths. And all those symbols let us see the world's truths through the eyes of another. As a lover's eyes show us our own bright selves. You saw me, and I have never stopped seeing you, my love.
But are you dead?
Yes, dead, not gone. I'm here, aren't I?
But the dark thing is here too.
If there's a shadow in your mind, it's because there's a light in your mind to cast it. You thought I was the light, but it was always inside you. I saw it. The whole world is full of lights, shining in the darkness.
Shining in the Darkness, a Sega Genesis RPG that I spent hours playing the summer before beginning junior high school. Like Strangeland and much of fantasy, it is about the struggle between a seemingly irresistible darkness and the light inside seemingly weak people.
Like the sky is full of stars, and the field is filled with fireflies. You thought I caught you as you fell through darkness, but you were the light I saw. We caught each other. In here, out there, our light is still shining.
We grope together sightless unless the eyes reappear as perpetual star, multifoliate rose of death's twilight kingdom, the hope only of empty man. From the Hollow Man.
And now, once more, you need to spread your wings and fly toward that light.
How? Every time I've tried to fly, I've crashed. And now the wings are gone.
You have what you need, my love.
He has nothing. And he will fly nowhere. Beyond this gloom in which you're hiding, there's just reality. As hard and sharp as a knife. Out there is what you're running from. Your black dog. Your dark thing. Your shadow. We are the reflection of a life you can't look in the face.
Don't look it in the face, my love. Look it in the eyes.
In the 1924 poem Eyes That I Last Saw in Tears, a precursor to the apocryphal part of The Hollow Man, referenced towards Strangeland, T.S. Eliot writes, Eyes that last I saw in tears, through division, here in Death's dream kingdom, the golden vision reappears, eyes shall not see unless at death's door, the other kingdom. Here, the eyes that the stranger is looking in are not just the woman's, but those of life itself.
And soar.
By any objective measure, my life has been really easy. I grew up in a stable family, in safe, prosperous neighborhoods, in a safe, prosperous country. I went to good schools where there were many teachers who cared a lot about their students. There wasn't serious violence at any of them. And you know, I didn't have any terrible diseases, and, you know, didn't suffer any tragedies that would be notable. But despite it all, I think even while I was, you know, at the peak of thriving, at the end of high school, I had gotten into a college I really wanted to go to. I was probably as fit as I'm ever going to be. I had played football and basketball and had some good friends. You know, I really still sort of felt exactly what this game is about, that there was a really terrible canker of doubt and self-doubt eating at me, this sense of the black dog chasing after you, and a sense of directionlessness. And I was very fortunate that, you know, that year when I was 18, I met my wife, and fortunately we lived in the same town, we were going to the same college, and, you know, she found something in me that was sufficient to fall in love with. And it's now 22 years later, and we have kids. And, this speech that the woman gives, it's not, my wife has never said those things to me. She is those things to me. And it's, there are people, I think, who are more fortunate than me because maybe for them, there isn't the superego in your head. There isn't the, this sort of like miserable pareidolia that I've talked about in the commentary tracks. People who don't need someone else to look at you and tell you what they see. But for me, it was life-changing to have someone look at you and love you and tell you what it is that they see and they love and show you what it is that they see and they love. And if, as I talked about before, if so much in life is putting on masks to be the person you think society wants you to be, that some situation wants you to be, a mask that will protect you from showing the things that you're embarrassed about, like the Phantom of the Opera. This is the opposite of that. This is someone who sees who you are and describes it to you in terms of love. And then you can be that person. And it's not a mask that you're putting on, and maybe it's a mask that you're taking off. And because there's this person who you love, who is your pole star, is the one who's telling you that you are something special too. And I just think, that is the difference between being trapped in Strangeland and Deadland and being able to live in the world of the living fully. And I don't think it doesn't have to be romantic love. I think it's true that those lights are all around us, that we're being seen by those shining lights all around us. You can even, in literature, you can find it, that there, these expressions of love for human beings and all of our failings and shortcomings, all of our ugliness and shamefulness, that we still find ourselves loved. We find ourselves loved by the humanists. We find ourselves loved by our families, by our friends. We find ourselves loved by artists who share their art with us. We find ourselves loved. If you're a person of faith, you find yourself loved by God. And I just think, this is maybe a cheesy way to end my commentary, but I do want to end it on this note, because so many of the commentary tracks are about these sad moments in life, that I think there was this transformative moment too of realizing that just as there are so many things that you might see, that I might see, and love in other people, that is also being directed back at us. And that's really how I wanted the game to end. That, to me, is the difference between this being a depressing game and this being a melancholy game. Of course, it's melancholy in the sense that the woman can't be saved, in that the man has gone through all of these things that caused him pain and suffering and shame. But the end message is he's still being seen with eyes of love, and he can still be the person who deserves that love. That is who he is. He never stopped being that person. And that, I think, is a hopeful message, and that's the way that we can face the tragedies and shames in our lives and go on knowing that, you know, there may be a lot of darkness out there, but everywhere around us there's light as well. I have a hard time telling happy stories, but at the same time, I really detest depressing stories. So what I end up with is what I call melancholy stories. Now, I'm not sure that this distinction between melancholy and depressing is a legitimate literary one, a legitimate even etymological one. But to me, the two are different. Both of them involve sad situations, challenging situations where the protagonist faces failure, where that failure may be impossible to overcome, and doom, death, and destruction are inevitable. But the difference between a melancholy story and a depressing story is that a melancholy story is about how the protagonist meets that doom with dignity, with love, and with pride. You know, the quintessential version of this is the warrior who gets to his feet to die on his feet. He doesn't win, but he doesn't die on his knees, groveling. A depressing story, by contrast, can have essentially the same scenario, but rather than presenting a heroic manner of meeting that doom, it shows that the seemingly heroic efforts of the protagonist are utterly futile. They don't even lead to any dignity. They probably lead to greater humiliation and greater suffering. So that the takeaway really is that in the face of horror and nightmare and doom, there's nothing to be done. It's only going to get worse unless the whims of the gods make it better. You know, I would put, for example, Philip Roth novels in the depressing category. And I guess to me at least, melancholy stories actually have a very valuable role to play. They help me as a reader, as a viewer, to think about how I should meet seemingly or even actually insuperable challenges in my life, how to endure them without giving up and without giving up my values. Whereas depressing stories just seem designed to rob you of that confidence. And so the goal in Strangeland was to tell this very sad story, very dark story, but to end it in a way that says there is still dignity and love.
Okay, and on that note,
and bright.
Let me use this on myself.
Goodbye, my love.
Okay, so that was the developer's commentary for Strangeland. Now, I am going to be rather concise because it's really late. I have to go to bed to get up for work tomorrow, or rather today. But I really wanted to finish. I have kind of mixed feelings after playing through the developer commentary, because on one hand, I feel like the story is actually a lot less mysterious than I gave it credit for. Like, it's essentially full of allusions to cancer over and over and over again. Most of them I didn't get the first time, but it doesn't really elaborate. Like, to be honest, it, in essence, by guessing that it was a story about a woman that has died of cancer and about a man who's depressed because of that, that essentially describes the entire story as it is. Like, there is nothing more, really, when you really go through it. That's it. It just has more layers. Well, not even more layers per se, that's a wrong word. It has more details with that framing of the story, but it never goes past what I just stated. Anyway, so that's kind of weird in a way, and I feel like parts of this game, especially when explained by the developers, they seemed in the end very pretentious and also random. Like, there has been a lot of references in this game that seems to exist for no other reason than for the developers to sort of, rub their sort of, what's the word? Their intellect and their how well read they are in your face. Like, the whole thing about mythologies and Norse gods and all that, it seems to come out of nowhere because there's no connection with the protagonist and his life. Like, it's just there because the head writer is a fan of Norse mythology, I guess. So I find it very weird and borderline annoying. Because, for example, in Sanitarium, which they actually claim as one of their, one of their inspirations, I loved how a solid 90% of everything that happens in the game could be, at the end, when you sort of understand the whole picture, could be linked to the protagonist's life, and you could see how his brain made up those scenarios by using elements from his own life. Whereas here, even after playing the game and after listening to the developer commentary, I have no idea why the protagonist's mind was so fixated on Norse mythology, of all things. Like, there's seemingly no actual reason for that, and I find that annoying. But on the other hand, I loved the idea of the of the commentary itself and of the annotations explaining all of the references, and I have to commend the effort that the developers went through to prepare that. I definitely appreciate that, and I think it's a great addition to the game. So overall, I would say Strangeland was good, bordering on very good sometimes. It is, in the end, a little bit simpler than I thought. The story is a little bit simpler than I thought. I thought it would be elaborated upon more, but in the end, as I said, what I guessed in the blind part of this playthrough is essentially it. The rest is like window dressing, more details, but never goes past this initial phrasing of the story about the woman who has died from cancer and the man who's depressed about it. There's no more detail about his life, for example, or about their life together. But overall, I did enjoy Strangeland, and in fact, I enjoyed it enough that I might check this other game that they mentioned they made before, Primordia. We'll see about that. As I said, for now, I'm going to wrap it up because it's very late and I have to go to bed, because otherwise I'm probably going to be dead at work tomorrow anyway, or rather today. It's actually past midnight. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'll try writing like a summary once I calm down a little bit and, gather my thoughts. If I do write a summary, it's going to be in the pinned comment underneath this video, and if I don't, then I guess I don't. For now, that's all for this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!